In this video, I will show how to use the forward pass and the backward pass methods in project management to find the early start, the early finish, and the late start and the late finish of each activity for some project. So let's consider the following project right here. This project has 7 total activities. For each of these activities, we've also listed the predecessor activity along with the duration of each activity. Now, the first thing that we want to do is just draw a rough sketch of this project. So we can see that activity A has no predecessor, so that means activity A comes first. So let's go ahead and just draw a little diagram right here. So we have activity A, then we can see that activity B has a predecessor of activity A. So activity A must come first. So let's draw an arrow from A to B. So we're saying activity A must happen first before activity B. Then for activity C, we can see that it also has a predecessor of activity A. So let's draw an arrow from A to activity C. Then for activity D, its predecessor is B, so let's draw an arrow from B to activity D. Then for activity E, it also has a predecessor of B, so we'll draw an arrow from B to activity E. And next, activity F has a predecessor of activity C, so we'll draw an arrow from C to F. And then we can see that activity G, the last activity, has 3 predecessors, D, E, and F. So we'll draw an arrow from D, E, and F, all to activity G. So this is our rough sketch of this particular project diagram. Now what we want to do is formalize this by using boxes that look like this. So for each activity in this project, what we want to write is the activity name in this box, the duration of the activity in this bottom middle box. Then we also want to write the early start of the activity, the early finish, along with the late start and the late finish of the activity. Now we're going to use a method called forward pass to figure out the early start and the early finish of each activity. And we're going to use a method known as backward pass to find the late start and the late finish of each activity. So let's go ahead and draw this diagram. So first let's fill in the activity name and the duration for all of the activities. Okay, next we're going to use the forward pass method to find the early start and the early finish of each activity. Now, the early start just tells us the earliest that an activity can start, assuming that there are no delays in any of the preceding activities. And the early finish, similarly, it tells us the earliest that an activity can finish, again, assuming that there are no delays in any of the preceding activities. So for the very first activity A, the early start is going to be 0. And when we write a number in these boxes for each activity, this number represents the end of this particular day along with the start of the next day. So we can think of this as the end of, quote, day 0, which is basically just the start of day 1. But the reason that we can't write a 1 right here is because that would indicate the end of day 1. And activity A can start at the beginning of day 1. So that's why we don't write a 1, we write a 0. Then to find the early finish, which will go in this box right here, all you have to do is take the early start and add the duration of that activity. So 0 plus 3 would be 3. So the earliest that activity A could finish is the end of day 3. Then what we're going to do is take this 3 and we're going to move it into the early start position of the activity that activity A leads into. So for B and C, they both get an early start of 3. And then similarly, the early finish for activity B is going to be 3 plus the duration of 4, which is 7. And for activity C, we do 3 plus the duration of 1, which is 4. So again, we'll take this 7, the early finish of activity B, and we'll place it into the early start position of the activities that it leads into. And similarly for activity C, we'll take this 4, this early finish, and move it into the early start of activity F. And then we'll repeat the process again. So for activity D, we'll take the 7 and add the duration of 5. 7 plus 5 is 12. The early finish for activity D is 12. Then for activity E, we'll do 7 plus 3, and that's 10. And for activity F, we have 4 plus 1 is 5. Now, this very last activity, for activity G, this is interesting because it has 3 activities that are leading into it. So what should we put right here for the early start date? Should it be a 12, a 10, or a 5? Well, when we're doing the forward pass method, we always take the largest number. So it will be a 12. And the reason for that is because if you think about it, activity G cannot start until D, E, and F have all been completed. And we can see that the earliest F could be completed is day 5, the earliest E could be completed as day 10, and the earliest activity D could be completed as day 12. So activity D will take the longest. So we have to wait all the way until day 12 until we can actually start activity G. And lastly, the early finish for activity G is simply going to be the early start, day 12, plus the duration of 4. 12 plus 4 is 16. So that was the forward pass method, and notice how we just started at the first activity and we moved forward through the diagram to find the early start and the early finish of each activity. Now what we can do is use the backward pass method, and this will allow us to find the late start and the late finish of each activity. And what this tells us is the latest day that an activity could start without delaying the project or without increasing the duration of the project. And the late finish similarly tells us the latest that an activity could finish without delaying the entire project or increasing the duration of the entire project. And the way we use this method is we start at the very last activity, and as the name says, we work backward through the diagram until we get to the starting activity. So here's how we start. We'll take the early finish of the last activity, so activity G, and we'll go ahead and bring that down into the late finish, so 16. Now what we do to find the late start of this activity is simply take the late finish and subtract duration. So 16 minus 4, that's 12. So we put a 12 right here. So the late start for activity G is 12. Now what we do is take this late start and move it into all of the preceding activities for the late finish. So we'll put a 12 right here, a 12 right here, and a 12 right here. And we'll repeat the process where we take the late finish and we subtract the duration to get the late start of each activity. So for activity F, we'll do 12 minus 1, which is 11. For activity E, we do 12 minus 3, which is 9. And for activity D, we do 12 minus 5, which is 7. Now notice that both activity D and E have the same preceding activity of B. So the question is, should we bring the late start of 7 from activity D or the late start of 9 from activity E into this late finish of activity B? Well, when we're doing backward pass, we always choose the minimum value. So in this case, we're going to choose a 7. So the 7 will go right here. And for activity F, we can see that its preceding activity is activity C. So we'll take the 11 and move it into the late finish position of activity C. Then we'll repeat the process again. So for activity B, we'll do 7 minus 4, which is 3. And for activity C, we do 11 minus 1, which is 10. And now we can see that activity B and C both have the same preceding activity of activity A. So once again, we'll look at both of their late starts, so a 3 and a 10, and we'll choose the minimum value to pull into this late finish for activity A. So that would be the 3. So we'll put a 3 right here. And lastly, to get the late start for activity A, we simply do the late finish of 3 minus the duration of 3 to get 0. So that's how you use the backward pass to find the late start and the late finish of each activity. Now, one last thing I want to mention is that once you've done the forward pass and the backward pass, you can then identify what is the critical path of this project. And the activities that are on the critical path are the ones where the late finish is equal to the early finish. Or the exact same way to say that is that the late start is equal to the early start. So in this particular project, we can see that activity A, B, D, and G are all on the critical path, because notice that their late finish is equal to their early finish, or similarly, their late start is equal to their early start. And what that means is that if any of these particular activities are delayed, even by 1 day, the duration of the entire project will increase. But the same is not true for the other activities C, E, and F that are not on the critical path, because these activities can be delayed by a certain amount of time without increasing the duration of the entire project. So that is really the importance of the forward pass and the backward pass. It allows us to identify the early start, early finish, and late finish of each activity. And as a consequence, it allows us to identify which activities are on the critical path for a particular project.